Good morning. Hey, my name is Erin Renfroe. I am a member of this church. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Pensacola. We're very glad to have you this morning. We want to take a few moments to welcome any guests we have with us today. We're glad you're here. And if you would, please consider joining us for refreshments after the service. We will have coffee and conversation that away. We don't have a written order of service, but each of you has been given one of these. This is a reusable card here that we would invite you to recycle at the end of the service. Inside you will find a sheet where you can share your joys and concerns with us. We will light a candle for your personal milestones or personal sorrows that have happened in the last week. If you are a visitor today and you have not already filled out one of these, they are out on the credenza. This will help us keep in touch with you if you would like to receive our weekly email and our monthly newsletter. Let's see, we have a couple of announcements. One, I won't do the whole announcement that we did last week, but we did have a new HVAC unit installed last week, thanks to Jerry and Mary Lee, who were here until 7 o'clock. And it was quite, as they say in Idaho, spendy. So we have gotten almost all the money put together in the budget that we need, but we were short about $1,000, so we are still passing the hat on that. You're welcome to write a check and put it into the offering basket or give electronically. Just indicate HVAC so that we know where to put it. And Patty Underwood tells us that thanks to everyone who brought food for Manna last Sunday, we had 19 pounds of canned goods and personal hygiene products donated, and they are always grateful for what we give. So thank you to everyone who contributed. Our opening words today are from Reverend John Gibb Millspa. All too often, we pace the geometries of our walled gardens, believing we are traversing the whole of creation. With spirits of discovery, let us uncover the mysteries nested in our routines. With the eagerness of children, let us seek out the secrets unfolding in our peripheral vision. Let us behold each fellow creature with reverence. Let us greet each day with praise and thanksgiving, for life is a gift of incomprehensible magnitude. Our lives are voyages with unknowable destinations. Along the way, let us meet, kiss, challenge, and support one another. Let us fashion a network of mutuality and extend it into the larger world. In these ways, we forge lives of goodness and beauty. And now we will have some music for centering. Our chalice lighting words today come from Sean Trapp. Our chalice reminds us that the fire within ourselves is the same fire that illuminates the universe. It is our reminder that all is connected, even through the space of the void, even though the space of the void is vast, and our experience here is but a blip in the cosmic timeline. This flame is our promise that in our smallness, in our short time on this earth, that we live deeply and intently, with love for one another, with honesty and integrity, to be guided by rational thought and critical thinking, and with a sense of shared responsibility. For as the late astronomer Carl Sagan reminded us, this pale blue dot is the only home we've ever known. And now, if you will, please rise in body or spirit and recite the covenant of this church with us. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you. You may be seated. This church is supported solely through donations by its members and friends. You will now receive an offering to further the work of the church, both within and beyond its walls. If you have any joys or sorrows you would like to share, please put them in the offering basket as it goes by. So our time for all ages this morning, I chose to talk about, thank you dear, the little red hen. And some of us of the younger generation may have heard this story fairly recently, but for me it had been a few years. So I'll give you the quick rundown. And then I have some remarks that I stole from someone by the name of Myra Zepf of the New Humanist. She wrote a wonderful article that I adapted to be a bit more for all ages. So the story of the little red hen goes, once upon a time, there was a little red hen who lived on a farm. Early one morning, she woke up and went outside, and there she found some wheat. "Who will help me plant the wheat?" said the little red hen. "Not I," said the bull. "Not I," said the cat. "Not I," said the rat. "Oh, very well, I'll do it myself," said the little red hen, and so she did. "Who will help me water the wheat?" said the little red hen. "Not I," said the bull. "Not I," said the cat. "Not I," said the rat. "Oh, very well, I'll do it myself," said the little red hen, and so she did. "Who will help me cut the wheat?" said the little red hen. "Not I," said the bull. "Not I," said the cat. "Not I," said the rat. "Oh, very well, I'll do it myself," said the little red hen. You're getting the idea. She carries the wheat to the mill all by herself. She grinds the wheat all by herself, kneads the bread, bakes the bread, all by herself. And then we come to the last question. "Who will help me eat the bread?" said the little red hen. "I will," said the bull. "I will," said the cat. "I will," said the rat. "Oh, no, you won't," said the little red hen. "I'll eat it myself." And so she did. But then we come to the comments by Myra on why I hate the little red hen. I love traditional folk tales. Rumpelstiltskin, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Little Red Riding Hood. Maybe it's all those deep, dark forests, castles, and medieval towns. Or maybe it's the magic. But there's always an exception. And for me, it is that horribly self-righteous nag, the little red hen. If I'm really honest, I just don't like her as a person. She's mean-spirited and whiny, bossy, and smug. Did she explain to the other animals at the start that she was planning to make bread? No, she didn't. She kept her plans to herself like a control freak. Or did she explain that she really needed help? No, she didn't. She planned this little lesson all along. And worst of all, they were given no chance to redeem themselves or to make it up to her. Imagine if the other animals were really good at something the hen didn't understand, like science or art, but we don't know that. Or they were exhausted after a day's work elsewhere. Or did they have a previous bad experience working with that bossy hen? Who was looking after their children while they did this work? What age were these other animals? Were they disabled or ill? If I were to write a new ending, it might go something like this. I did all the work, so I should eat the loaf myself, said the little red hen. The others thought for a little while. I know, said the bull, I could go to the shop and get some jam. I could wash the dishes afterwards, said the cat. And I can set the table, said the rat. Very well, said the little red hen with a smile. I don't like eating on my own anyway. All right, so if Heather will come up and help me light candles, I will read the joys and concerns that we received. Patty Underwood tells us that her friend Olivia Howard's cancer has returned. I'm very sorry for that. Dolly Berthelot is happy to have a new little book coming out this month. Wonderful. Mystical Humanist, UU, etc. This is a short, ethical, spiritual memoir. UUCP is one of the highlights. It is the first in, I'm sorry, I can't quite read this, a new series. Is that Scars to the Stars?
Scars to Stars.
Scars to Stars by various authors by, is it Energeon Publishing? Can't say that. Energeon. Okay. So everyone be on the lookout for Dr. Dolly's new book. Looking forward to it. And we will light one more candle for the joys and concerns that are in our hearts today, but unspoken. All right, in just a moment, I am going to introduce Dr. Rick Harper, our speaker today. But before we get started with our message, let's take a moment to sit in stillness and silence with one another. Please feel free to meditate, reflect, or pray, or simply enjoy the quiet. All right, with us today is Dr. Rick Harper. He received his BA from Guilford College and an MA and PhD in economics from Duke University. Rick worked as a professional economist at the University of West Georgia until retiring in 2017. He directed UWF's Hayes Center for Business Research and Economic Development, conducting numerous studies of the local, regional, and state economies and economic sectors. Rick served as the Senior Policy Advisor for Economic Affairs for the Florida Senate from 2012 until 2014, and was the economic expert for the state of Florida in its economic damages litigation with BP. Rick now serves as the economic advisor to Triumph Gulf Coast Incorporated, providing advice and support to the Triumph Board of Directors as it seeks to distribute $1.5 billion in Deepwater Horizon damages funds to projects that will grow and diversify the Northwest Florida economy. So if you'll join me in welcoming Dr. Rick Harper.
I think I'm fine.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I guess I should begin by saying that you're very brave to listen to an economist at this time of day. Dolly asked if I might talk about the labor market in the U.S. We're in puzzling times coming out of the COVID crisis, hopefully, and the labor market is not really recovering to the same extent that other aspects of the economy are. And so I've put together about a dozen slides to show you some of the critical aspects as I see them. And I personally would enjoy it if you would feel free to stop me with questions or comments at any time. We're a nice small group, and I'd love to respond to whatever it is that you'd like to talk about. So, next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of the economy. And why I put this up here, the blue line is what the Federal Reserve economists and statisticians think the economy is capable of producing using this imperfect measure called gross domestic product. And then the red line is what the economy has actually produced. And so in looking at this, the thing that really strikes me is how fast our recovery has been relative to what it was after the Great Recession of December 2007 until June of 2009. What happened, basically, is that the Federal Reserve and the Treasury got the tools that they needed during the Great Recession to inject enormous amounts of economic stimulus into the economy. They had to wait a year and a half to get that during the Great Recession, but they had it in hand, those tools, so they were able to, within a couple of months of the pandemic inception, they were able to put the beginnings of what would be trillions of dollars into people's pocketbooks so that they could spend it and maintain the economy. So we are getting closer and closer to being back on trend, and have some things to say about that. Now, but we're not there yet, particularly in terms of the labor market. Here, I'm showing in the blue line, this is labor force participation. So I'm showing the labor force participation rates for the US in red for prime aged workforce. So that is ages 25 to 54 years. And normally we'd expect the overwhelming majority of people of that age to be working. And then the blue line is for Canada. We start at that left-hand vertical axis back in 1991, and we run that all the way out until today. And what you see that's interesting here is that U.S. labor force participation has, for about 20 years, been trending downward a little bit, fewer and fewer people actively participating in the workforce. But what's really striking is that when the pandemic hit, Canada shut down just like the US did, even in a more severe fashion. But the Canadian labor market has really recovered much more quickly than the US labor market. So each percentage point measured on that vertical axis in the US economy is about 1.5 million people. This is total non-farm employment. And so what this chart shows you is that relative to February of 2020, just before we entered the pandemic, we're still down several million people from where we were. And why is that? Well, some of it is due to the massive increase in the saving rate. So we see here charts for both household and corporate savings, and we see that during the pandemic, those savings rates rose massively. And that's because the federal government was shoveling money into people's pockets through extended unemployment insurance benefits, through the child care tax credit, and other sources of income. And because people, rationally look well into the future before making a spending decision, a lot of people actually just saved that money and socked it away. And so we see that behavior here, where the saving rate, which had been down, in the late part of the last decade, it had reached about 4%. The rest of the world, the citizens of the rest of the nations of the world tend to save more on the order of 15, 18% of their income. In some countries, the Germans are notoriously high savers. They save so much, in fact, that all the things that they produce in their factories, from automobiles to tools to everything else, they save a lot of the income from that instead of spending it. And that means that they have a big trade surplus because they don't spend that money. Instead, they sock it away. The US is kind of the opposite. We have long had the tendency to spend everything that we make, that we earn, and then some. So we have a trade deficit because nations which don't save very much relative to other countries are going to have trade deficits because they buy more from other nations than other nations buy from them. Question?
Yeah, how do you correlate the savings rate with labor force participation? I don't see how you, at least you haven't explained it.
Well, one thing that we see happening is that because the saving rate is so high, people haven't been forced back into the labor market as quickly as they might have been if they didn't have those sources of income which allowed them to increase their saving rate. So part of the shortfall in labor force participation is simply people saying that, you know what, I don't like my job that much and I don't have to go back right away. And that's particularly true for people on the lower rungs of the job ladder who don't have the luxury of being engaged in work that they can do from home. So some of the shortfall is explained by an abnormally high saving rate relative to what we were before the pandemic. Yeah.
That makes logical sense, but I mean, but is there proof for that the labor participation rate is tied to the savings rate that you described? Like I said, it makes logical sense, but I just kind of wonder how you truly tie those together.
Well, there is, and let me show you some of the proof that we see. Here is work, this is from Goldman Sachs, and what we can see is some of the sources of the displacement. Some of it clearly is due to the fact that many people are not returning to work until they absolutely have to. We can think of our kids' generation, for example. If they have loose ties to the labor market, if they're working in food service, leisure and hospitality, they may well not go back to work until they need a paycheck. But Goldman Sachs investment research identifies a 5 million person shortfall in the labor force, and the largest single source that they identify is that people who choose, and they respond to the current employment survey administered by the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they tell the BLS why aren't they in the labor market. Overwhelmingly, the largest response, and you see along the bottom horizontal axis there, particularly for people who are 55 and above, is they don't want a job right now. And Goldman Sachs calculates the shortfall in labor force participation as being about 5 million people. And of that, they identify 3.3 million of that shortfall as being people of an older demographic, 55 years and older, who, because, for several reasons, one is that the value of assets, you know, in the US, the largest asset that most households own is the equity in their home. And that's increased tremendously. If we look at the Pensacola real estate market, Zillow tells us that between September of 2020 and September of 2021, that home prices rose by an average of 22%, which is just astonishing. And so people who feel that they have more equity in their home, thus their financial position is better. And of course, if you've largely been invested in the stock market, which so many people, certainly in this room, have had to do because fixed income assets don't yield enough return. Thank you very much, Federal Reserve, for keeping interest rates on the floor down near zero. So you can't make any money on bonds. Instead, you have to invest in a riskier portfolio of stocks. But stocks have done super well. Benchmark indices up 13 to 15% over the last year. And so if your portfolio is doing well, you have a lot of equity in your home, and you're over 55, then you might well respond to the Bureau of Labor Statistics that I just don't want to go back to work. And those people I'd project, are going to be out of the labor market for good because they will have retired early, because they're financially better able to than they had anticipated several years ago. And once you leave the labor market and the skills begin to atrophy, you get rusty, then you may well not be qualified for the sort of position that you left. And that's particularly true for people who didn't have jobs where the characteristics of the job let them work from home. Okay? And so older people who were working, going to a place of work and couldn't work from home were particularly likely to leave the labor market. So when we combine these things, plus if you look at younger families, the inability to get childcare consistently means that often one member of the household would need to stay home and do the work that is critical but unpaid, which is taking care of kids. We've certainly seen nanny employment go through the roof, and because many nannies may be paid in cash, it's not a tax-deductible expense for households typically, those people would not show up as being in the labor market. So I expect we're seeing a combination of people working kind of in the gray labor market for cash, not reporting those wages, and thus they're not picked up by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in their count. That accounts for some of the shortfall. And then the fact that older people may not be back in the labor force, and that some younger people don't have to be back in the labor force right away, are the major causes of the employment shortfall. Now, another cause of the difficulty that businesses have, so this is the supply side of the labor market. The U.S. has long had a pretty robust immigration set of numbers over time. In fact, if we look at Florida, because Florida is older than the average state in the U.S., in fact, were it not for inbound migration from both other states in the U.S., but importantly here, from abroad, were it not for immigration, Florida's population would actually be falling because we don't have enough young people having kids to offset the attrition of older generations. And so Florida relies critically on immigrants, both from other states, where for the 2010 to 2020 period, Florida over that period had more immigration from other states than any other state in the Union. You know, Florida, Arizona, South Carolina, always up in the top, but Florida at the top. And we also have a shortfall in immigration. As an economist, I look at these numbers and they are frightening, because if you want to be the most important, the most dominant nation in world affairs, you really have to have either an enormous population, as China does, as India does, 1.3, 1.4 billion people, or an extraordinarily productive and wealthy population, such as the US, which still has the world's largest gross domestic product, even though we only have a quarter of the population of China. If you wanted to increase immigration, which we could easily do, and to me that's the number one policy mistake that the current administration and the previous administration made, was to severely limit the number of people that could come and live in our country. We only have a third the population density of Europe. We're a big empty country relative to other nations, and the way to maintain our status as the leading nation in the world, to me, seems like a simple question and answer. It's to have more population growth. And you know, you can get it a couple of ways. You can either, you know, take 20 years and make your own new entrant to the workforce as a family, or you can get them immediately. You can invite them to college. I think the number one policy we ought to adopt is we ought to say that anybody that gets a visa to come to UWF and study, or to UF or wherever, as part of the condition of getting that visa, they have to stay for at least 5 years after they finish their degree. And that's the way to ensure a highly educated, large population, which is, given that we do not face particular physical constraints to growing the country and growing our influence, to me, that would be the smartest way to get it. Yes?
Focus on Florida for just a
Mm-hmm,
minute.
sure.
When you said attrition, did you mean natural death?
Yes, exactly. The excess of deaths over births. And
do we also have an attrition in older people moving away?
not really. Florida has a net increase of about 750 people per day. Of that, about negative 10 or 20 is natural increase. Texas is a contrast there because Texas is a much younger population and they have more births than deaths. Florida has more deaths than births. And so all of our growth comes from either interstate migration or international migration. So, I think for Florida, as an economist, I think that the problems of growth are better than the problems of stagnation. And so with that bias in hand, I think that given that we can pick our kind of growth and that we could pick well-educated people who want to come to our universities and get their degrees, we ought to focus on that. We ought to have an immigration policy that looks more like Canada. Here we have an immigration policy that, while being humane in admitting people who have family members here, it's not necessarily smart in terms of admitting the people who are the most productive in terms of the taxes that they pay, the income that they would earn, and what they could contribute economically to society. Yeah. In the back.
Could you repeat the question after?
Yes, I could repeat the question. Thanks.
Florida has a large number of people that retire here, so our immigration is a little different than other places. Say Michigan, and you don't retire.
Florida, so the question was, isn't Florida's immigration pattern different from other states? And the answer is absolutely it is. Because of exactly what you mentioned, that when you can come to a state with no income tax, and of course the corollary to no income tax, I guess there are 9 states now that have no state income tax, but we're a low tax, low service state. We have fewer state employees per 100,000 residents. I haven't checked for this year, but we're always in the bottom 3. We're just a low service state. The characteristics, the demographics of our population are very different from other states. And we do have more older people moving here who've grown to dislike the cold weather in Michigan. The east coast of Florida gets an east coast migration. New York, New Jersey. Here we get more of a Missouri, Illinois migration down to northwest Florida. And so, to me as an economist, the ideal immigrant that is in keeping with Florida's long tradition of attracting older residents would be to try and recruit those business owners who might be 50 or 55 and still interested in running their business but can do it from anywhere in the country. Invite them to come here, encourage them to bring a branch of their business to us. That would up the average income that our state has, as well as bringing well-educated people. We face a number of challenges. The biggest challenge I think that Florida faces is not the quantity of people and the quantity of jobs. We're doing fine on quantity. It is quality of jobs. We're disproportionately skewed towards jobs serving our tourist population and our retiree community. While some of the healthcare jobs are great, still home health aides, for example, are poorly paid relative to people on higher rungs of the job ladder. And so that has meant that here in Pensacola, whereas back when NADEP was in full swing and manufacturing was big in the 70s, our per capita personal income was at about 95% of the national level, and that's not adjusted for any price differentials. So really our purchasing power was even higher than that because we were dirt cheap. But as we sit here today in 2021, looking at the most recent census income statistics from 2019, we see that our per capita personal income in Pensacola has dropped to only about 84% of the national average. And so that big drop is really primarily due to a shift into jobs in leisure and hospitality. Retail's always been big in Pensacola, shops, and then the other thing is jobs in the service sector, in addition to leisure and hospitality, particularly in healthcare. So it makes a difference in terms of the purchasing power of our community, and which influences the quality of amenities that we have here as well. So this is the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta that has the wage growth tracker by age group, and it looks like there's 16 to 24. And so on the right-hand side of the graph, the last two numbers are 2018 and 2020. And what we see is that in order to induce people to come back into those jobs that young people disproportionately hold, which are jobs at the entry level in the job market, disproportionate leisure and hospitality, we have seen a big wage increase, okay? Much more so than for other age groups in the economy who, having more experience, would be qualified for better jobs. Instead, the increase in income that people higher in the income distribution have seen has largely been a result of the appreciation of assets that they hold, either stocks or real estate. And so this is why we see signs up. If you've had the unpleasant experience of driving through Destin in the last couple of months, you've noticed that Whataburger is offering hiring bonuses, and that now the standard starting wage at the bottom rungs of the job ladder is $15 an hour or more. And so we see that this is the wage growth tracker by age. And then here's the wage growth tracker by wage level. And you see the correlation in the kind of greenish there. That's where we saw in the previous slide, the younger people are congregated. And we see, in fact, that happily, we're seeing a bit of an increase in wages for those who are less well off, because they're badly needed and businesses haven't been able to recruit them. Now, turning locally, this is the job picture for what the feds call Pensacola, Ferry Pass, Brent, Metropolitan Statistical Area. This is Escambia and Santa Rosa County. You can see on the left vertical axis there that way back in 2016, we were at about 175,000 jobs. We had grown that to almost 190,000 jobs in the two-county area. And that slight gray shading there is the brief but violent recession that began in February of 2020 and went through March. But in April, we began to recover. And as Charlotte will tell you, the weird thing about measuring recessions is that you come out of a recession the day that you start to grow employment, even though you're still mired deep in economic misery. But the day you start to grow employment again, even though it's from a lower level, that's the day the recession ends. And so, but if you extended that trend line from the left, from 2016 out, and just had it go straight on out, you can see that Pensacola is several thousand jobs short of where it should be. And so back in the day, 1990 to 2015, Pensacola, the two-county metro area, grew at about 1,500 jobs a year. But what you can see is that from 2015 onward until the COVID recession hit, we were growing at about 4,500 jobs a year. So great growth, places like Navy Federal. And I'm happy to say that the biggest project at Triumph Gulf Coast, where I now work as economic advisor, the biggest project we funded to date with that BP oil spill damages money is $66 million to put into those new hangars at the Pensacola airport. And they belong to the city and always will. So they're a public asset for the benefit of the taxpayers and residents of Pensacola, but the city has a lease agreement with ST Engineering, Singapore Technologies. Depending on the year and who their clients are, they go back and forth between number one and number two. Biggest maintenance, repair, and overhaul facility for aviation in the world, and they've been slammed because their customer they service out of Pensacola right now, as you can see from the planes that you can see from Langley, are UPS planes, and UPS has been flying, as has every cargo freight line that carries Amazon packages, and so that means they're having planes come in more often because they reach those 10,000 hours, those 1,000-hour service requirements much more quickly. They're being used intensively. And what we're going to see over the next number of years as as the hangars open, if you've driven by recently, you've seen that there's the huge dirt piles for Hangar 2 is going up right now. Those are on the east side of the north-south runway, and then hangars 3 and 4 will go up along with their admin building. They're committed to have 1,425 jobs in those 4 hangars that will provide critically needed employment for people who did not have the luxury or the inclination, perhaps, to go through 4-year university and get a degree and incur the risk of that student loan debt that is bigger today than it ever was when we were back in college. And so they will be able to start there and work there, and by the time they're in the 5th year, they will be making in the 70s and 80,000s working there in those hangars as maintenance, repair, and overhaul technicians with an airframe and power plant certification. So job market growth has been very strong. We sometimes think of ourselves as a slow growth area. We're not slow relative to the rest of the nation. The gray line is Pensacola. 1969 is set to be 100%. And today we have about 300% more jobs than we had in 1969. We've grown substantially faster than the nation. We're only slow relative to some of the rest of Florida. Yeah, question.
How is the composition as far as salary compare in Pensacola with the rest of the country?
So the question is, how does the composition of salary compare to the rest of the country? And the answer is very poorly. And it's the biggest challenge that Florida faces, in my view, is not the quantity of employment. We're doing great on the number of jobs, but the problem is that our economy increasingly is expanding to handle the needs of retirees who come here. And, you know, there's a little bit of a measurement issue there because many retirees bring their accumulated wealth with them in the form of their investment accounts. And the government only counts that as income when you spend down that money, either due to required minimum distributions or withdrawals to fund your living needs. The government counts it as income today if it's coming out of a tax-deferred account. And so today it gets counted as income and you pay income tax on it. But if it's out of an investment account, then it's not counted as income because you earned that money back in the day and you're simply withdrawing from your portfolio. So yes, Florida is subject to some bias that younger states are not because retirees and baby boomers are wealthy relative to kids these days, have higher incomes and have enjoyed the benefits of cheap education and a robust jobs market. So yes, there is some bias, but we still have a problem with incomes in Florida. In fact, here it is. Here's the chart of incomes in Florida. And so you see that on the left-hand side of the horizontal axis, it starts back in 1969. And what Woods and Poole Economics reports is that Pensacola, in the orange, the U.S. is set to be 100% in each year. Relative to the U.S., Pensacola now is down. Actually, I told you in the low 80s, it's actually in the most recent year, according to Woods and Poole, it's down at 80% of the national average per capita personal income. So to me, that's the big challenge we face. That's why we need to invest in education, make sure that every child shows up for kindergarten ready to learn to read and write. And the most important economic statistic I think that we have is, are your third graders progressing and reading well? And that's going to create the skill sets that we need to qualify for those higher jobs, because businesses will come and to where the employers are. You know, back when I was in school, we thought that capital was fixed, the machinery was fixed in location, but that workers were mobile. It's really turned around so that over the last generation, workers have become fixed in place and the businesses move to meet them. If we have highly educated students with good skills, then we're going to have high incomes. That's why we need to lean heavily on Pensacola State College and the University of West Florida and the Escambia County School District to ensure that young people graduate not just with a we pretend to teach and they pretend to learn sort of degree, but with a degree that gives them useful job-relevant skills when they graduate. And finishing up here, this is what the future holds. Here, the leftmost year on the horizontal axis is 2010, and what we see is, well, you tell me. This is demographic categories. The dark blue is less than 18 years of age. The red is ages 18 to 24. The green is ages 25 to 44. The purple is ages 45 to 64. And then the kind of teal is ages 65 and over. What jumps out at you on this graph? Future population growth is retiring baby boomers. And so that's why it is particularly urgent that we get the education question right, because the overall motion of the ocean is going to be people who look, people who have silver hair, if they have any hair. Yeah. The question in a nutshell was, what's the importance of leadership? Do we have good leadership at the city and county level? Could it be better? And what should be the role of the university, given that it owns and manages the historic trust, 28 properties downtown? And I guess first thing to say is that I couldn't agree with you more, that as we look at what does it take to get Pensacola to the next level of economic activity, and again, my bias is undoubtedly fairly apparent here, that I think the problems of growth are much more manageable and better than the problems of economic stagnation. I would rather be here in a fast-growing community trying to manage growth than I would be in Iowa watching all the schools close and the small towns board up and drift away over time. So I think changing us from a summer beach community, which we long have been, to a year-round community, recognizing the huge asset that our downtown is enormously important, because after all, how can hoteliers and restaurateurs make the profits that they need to make huge capital investments if they're only profitable from Memorial Day until the kids go back to school? So rather than having a 10-week tourist season, I think promoting shoulder season tourism is enormously important and would lead to a much more sustainable business environment that's not so susceptible to risks such as Deepwater Horizon shutting down the visitors. UWF and PSC's role in that, I think they have different roles to play. I think that Pensacola State College should be all in on workforce training. The Florida Department of Education is moving in that direction with massive numbers of certificate programs that are externally validated, industry recognized, and the importance of external validation is to not fall in the trap of offering a lazy curriculum to lazy students from lazy professors. If it's an externally validated exam, if you look at this Federal Aviation Administration Section 147 exams that everybody that works at ST at the airport is going to have to pass to be a fully certified mechanic, those are administered by the Federal Aviation Administration at standalone testing facilities, and they are rigorous. And so that means then that the teaching has to be rigorous, which means that the students who, bless their hearts, aren't really sophisticated enough to know exactly what they should be learning when they get there and to recognize a good program and how it's different from a weak program, That's the sort of thing that we at Triumph, and we've funded several dozen certificate programs across the 8-county service area, and we insist that the metric be the number of externally validated, industry-recognized certifications that are awarded, rather than here PSC, here Haney Tech in Bay County, or here UWF, here's some money, go out and do good work. We've insisted on benchmarks in terms of externally validated measures of student attainment. And so Pensacola State College should be a leader in offering workforce cybersecurity certificates. You know, the things that say that here you are credentialed and competent to work maintaining our nation's network infrastructure against foreign and domestic threats, and that UWF, instead of offering certificate programs, should be at a higher level of sophistication where they are hiring faculty who can be counterparts to the defense contractors who come to put people at Corey Station or maybe work downtown and build a building in the tech park. That UWF should have faculty programs and graduate programs, graduate school programs, which would yield much more sophisticated approaches to the cybersecurity issues that all businesses and the military and government face. And so there is that distinction between the four-year university with graduate programs versus a state college versus a technical school, which will be offering, you know, the Microsoft suite of programs to its students as well as some more sophisticated stuff. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and the metro areas that have success in that sort of training are the ones that are going to continue to have much higher incomes and better amenities for the people that live there. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer to say that yes, I agree with you.
Well, I have to look a lot more, so I'll be in touch with you.
Okay, please do. Yep, I still have my UWF email, so. Okay, so I bet we're out of time, but a question, yeah.
Do we have an estimate of the additive negative effect of the Trump administration's curtailing of immigration?
So the question for you on Zoom is, do we have any quantitative estimates of the negative impacts of curtailing immigration, which were true initiated by the Trump administration, but unfortunately have been continued by the Biden administration? And there's another thing at work there as well, which is the increasing prevalence of birth control in Latin America and greater attention given to education of children, so that the birth rate in Mexico, for example, is a third of what it was 3 decades ago. And so you just don't have as many people pouring across the border in any circumstance as you would have decades ago. But then, you know, the thought that our governor is sending our deputies to the border at our taxpayers' expense to address an immigration problem that really doesn't exist, according to the data, where immigration is becoming less of a problem and less of an opportunity. But the U.S. still has the opportunity to attract the best and brightest minds in the world, and we ought to be doing that so that they can either stay here or take that expertise back to their home country. The quantitative estimates, I'm not familiar. I've been looking for them. I haven't seen any strong ones. I did some estimates myself last year, looking at what if Florida adopts the very exclusionary E-Verify program of employment verification, and estimated that, trying to remember the name, that as many as 400,000 workers would leave the state of Florida. And you know, that's why Whataburger can't find the people that when you pull up in the parking lot, you always see them smoking outside the back door. But the kitchen help, the construction help, if there's nobody to pick the strawberries, then that means that you don't need a high school educated American to drive a strawberry truck. And so the notion that an immigrant's job takes a job away from an American is simply incorrect. I mean, people generally, immigrants have a higher workforce participation than domestic residents. They just do. So for you on Zoom, the question is, do some of our policies, economic policies at the state and federal level, cause people to stay out of labor force participation? Because remember that the Bureau of Labor Statistics counts you as in the labor market if you're actively looking for a job but are unemployed, or if you're working. And it picks up 1099 employees, gig workers, as long as they're not being paid cash under the table. And so my answer to your question is yes and no. The yes part is certainly some of the decreased employment we see today is due to the fact that we had a remarkably robust stimulus program from the U.S. Treasury authorized by the U.S. Congress. Every dollar that gets spent by the Treasury is authorized by the Congress. And then the part where I disagree is that we continue to have healthcare tied to your employment rather than tied to just being here, right? That's unique among major industrialized nations. And then we encourage downward movement of the birth rate by failure to have adequate preschool programs of high quality and programs even for younger kids, which might go so far as to include paid parental leave, things like that. So I think yes and no. Looking at it from how do we get the best trained workers, we need to start educating our kids early. You know, there's a huge racial disparity in wages that we see everywhere. It's present here in Pensacola. And the smartest economic development policy we could do is education interventions to make sure that Black kids who are born just as smart as white kids and continue that way until running into the obstacles that are associated with poverty, if we could bring them up to average levels of income, that would be a 15% bump in our metro area GDP. We have a metro area GDP of 20 billion, so we could, you know, that'd be a great way to bump it, and that's going to take effective childhood interventions, I think, but it's politically tough because you don't see the payoff to that until 10, 20 years down the road, but you have to incur the cost today. Yeah, so the question is, what about the second generation of immigrants, the children of immigrants who come here? What is their success rate? And there's been careful work done on that by Rand Corporation, and what they showed is that lower skilled initial immigrants may in fact not fully pay their way, but that the second generation absolutely pays their way because they become fully participating members with all of the relevant skills, whereas workers in the first generation are both less skilled because our immigration policy is structured so that if you successfully cross the Rio Grande in the middle of the night after paying your coyote $1,000 or whatever and make it into the labor market, what you have to do is accept any abuse that your boss gives you, working for lower wages than anybody else, and not participating in the economy fully because your English is not good enough and because you are undocumented. But when we have the second generation, they are full participants in every sense. And the children of immigrants, you know, we're a nation of immigrants, and children have generally tended to do very well. So to me, that says, I mean, there's a radical idea out there which I fully support, and it is that the U.S. should try its best to move from 334 million people to 1 billion people. That's when we would truly dominate. If you're the biggest player in the world economy, you get to make the rules. And instead, the way to beat China is not to step back and end the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's to get the inclusion of other nations, which is what the TPP was, and to grow our population so we're not only wealthier in terms of per capita income, but we have a bunch of people as well. And I bet we're running out of time. The hook is coming up. So thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
I can tell we're all enjoying this conversation, but we do need to end the service so the people who don't want to sit here anymore can go. but perhaps you can stick around for coffee, and people who still would like to talk with you can.
Let me check with the home department.
Sure, but yeah, I'm so glad that everyone was so engaged with this. This is wonderful. Thank you very much.
Having me.
Yeah. All right, we did have a quick, let's see. Yeah, if you could get that going for me. This is our closing music, and as usual, I picked an odd one, but this one really fascinated me, so I thought I would share.
All right. Get on, boy, get on, get on.
Anyway, that just, if you couldn't read the small print, that was in the 1920s. They were literally moving a railroad to work in South Carolina on a dam, and the part that the music played just made things ding in my head. Our closing words today are by Reverend Dr. Richard S. Gilbert. As we leave this community of the Spirit, may we remember the difficult lesson that each day offers more things than we can do. May we do what needs to be done, postpone what does not, and be at peace with what we can be and do. Thank you all very much for coming today. And thanks to Dr. Rick Harper.